The sun had just begun its descent over the Miami marina, casting golden reflections on the water that glimmered like scattered jewels. James, a 30-year-old boat mechanic, wiped his hands on a rag finishing up repairs on a small sailboat. His life was simple, working hard, living modestly, and finding contentment in the small joys of his routine. He enjoyed the quiet hum of the marina, the smell of salt water in the air, and the rhythmic lapping of waves against the docks. It was a world far removed from flashing cameras, gala events, or luxury yachts, the kind he rarely ever touched. That calm shattered in an instant. A plume of black smoke rose from the east side of the marina. James squinted, heart pounding, as flames licked the edges of a massive white yacht dock nearby. Panic erupted around him. People screamed and scrambled, some jumping into the water to escape the spreading fire. James didn't think. His hands instinctively grabbed a life ring, and he sprinted toward the chaos. Amid the smoke and heat, he saw her clinging to the railing, eyes wide with terror, hair matted with smoke and water. Without hesitation, he dove into the water, cutting through the waves with powerful strokes. The yacht burned behind him, a roaring inferno, but all he could focus on was reaching her. He reached her side and grabbed her trembling hands. "I've got you," he shouted over the roar of fire and the crackling wood. Her grip was tight, her nails digging into his palms, but he held firm, guiding her through the water towards safety. Once on the dock, James helped her stand, wrapping a soaked blanket around her shoulders. Her chest heaved, her breath coming in panicked gasps. Thank you so much," she whispered, her voice trembling. James, soaked and smelling of smoke, managed a small smile. "Just glad you're safe," he replied simply, brushing wet hair from his eyes. Around them, firefighters sprayed water, trying to contain the blaze that had consumed nearly half the yacht. Spectators snapped photos, murmuring about the heroic young man who had saved the woman from certain death. She looked at him with an intensity that made his stomach twist. There was a yes, but something else, something unspoken that James couldn't quite name. He noticed the expensive fabric sticking to her skin, the diamond earrings glinting in the sunlight, and the faint scent of high-end perfume. Despite the chaos, his mind registered the wealth around her, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was that she was alive. As paramedics arrived and ushered her away for medical checks, James stepped back, shivering from the cold and adrenaline. He watched her go, feeling an unexpected pang of loss. Though he barely knew her, little did he know this woman. Clara was not just any tourist or random visitor. She was a millionaire heiress, accustomed to yachts' luxury and endless attention, and unbeknownst to James, this single act of courage would soon weave their lives together in ways neither of them could have imagined. Clara sat in the back of the ambulance, wrapped in a thick blanket, her body still trembling from shock, her eyes white and curious, kept darting to James, who had stepped back onto the dock, even through the chaos. Through the blare of sirens and the hiss of firefighters' hoses, she remembered the strength in his arms, the calm determination in his eyes. He had risked everything to save her, a stranger in the water, and she couldn't stop thinking about him. Normally, her life was a whirlwind of parties, charity galas, and endless social obligations. But that day it had narrowed to a single vivid memory: James. By the time the paramedics confirmed she was unharmed, aside from a few minor cuts and bruises, Clara's assistant had arrived, fussing over her with antiseptic wipes and designer scarves. "You should have called security." "You can't just," the assistant began, but Clara waved her off. She wasn't thinking about protocol or social expectations, or even the expensive yacht now burning behind them. All that mattered was the man who had pulled her from the water. "I'm fine," she said softly, glancing back toward the dock. James was gone, swallowed by the crowd. But the memory of his hands, his steady voice, and the courage he exuded lingered. The next morning, Clara couldn't concentrate. Meetings, phone calls, investment plans, none of it mattered. She kept replaying the scene in her mind. The smoke, the flames, the desperate scramble of passengers. And then James emerging from the water, his determination unshaken. Something about him was magnetic. She found herself calling the marina, under the guise of thanking the staff, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. James, on the other hand, had returned to his life with a quiet satisfaction. He didn't seek recognition or reward, and he certainly didn't expect a wealthy socialite to remember him. His days were usually spent fixing boats, checking engines, and chatting with local fishermen. Yet something had shifted, even as he tightened bolts and sanded holes. He found himself thinking about the woman in the water. There was something about her gaze, intense, alive, and strangely vulnerable, that had left an imprint on him. A few days later, Clara insisted on meeting him again. This time it wasn't out of necessity. but curiosity and perhaps something more. She arranged for a discreet meeting at a quiet cafe downtown, far away from flashing cameras and prying eyes. When James arrived, he found her waiting, casually dressed yet radiant, her damp hair now dry and styled. She smiled a little nervously. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said. James shrugged, trying to mask his surprise at being noticed by someone from a world so different from his own. "You're welcome," he said simply. But the brief exchange sparked something neither expected. Over coffee, conversation flowed easily, laughter punctuating the awkwardness. Clara discovered James was more than just a brave rescuer. He was witty, grounded, and refreshingly honest. And James realized Clara was more than a wealthy socialite. She was curious, genuine, and quietly unguarded in his presence. By the time they parted that afternoon, neither could stop thinking about the other. The bridge between their worlds had begun to form. Fragile yet compelling, neither knew where it might lead, but both felt the undeniable pull of something new, something thrilling and dangerously beautiful. James felt uneasy as he walked toward the cafe, running a hand through his hair. He had spent his life in a world defined by routines, fixing engines, checking boats, and keeping to himself. Now he was about to meet Clara again, a woman whose life seemed to orbit entirely different planets, of wealth, glamour, and privilege. He wondered if he could even fit into that world, or if she would see him as nothing more than the man who had saved her from a fire. Clara, meanwhile, waited nervously, glancing at her watch and tapping her fingers against the table. She wasn't accustomed to this type of anticipation. Normally her days were meticulously planned, from meetings to charity events to private shopping trips, but today was different today. She was meeting someone who had shaken the carefully constructed world she lived in, someone whose bravery and sincerity had left a mark on her heart. When James arrived, the initial awkwardness was palpable. Clara smiled, a soft, genuine expression that lit up her face, and James felt his tension ease slightly. "Hi," he said, offering a small, tentative smile. "Hi," she replied, her voice lighter than he remembered. Tinged with warmth, they ordered coffee, sitting across from each other at a small, quiet table tucked away from the bustling cafe crowd. As the conversation unfolded, James discovered that Clara's life, for all its glitz, wasn't as perfect as it seemed. She had responsibilities and pressures that few could imagine, and a loneliness that her wealth couldn't fill. Clara, in turn, learned about James's world, the simplicity of hard work, the satisfaction of building and fixing things with his own hands, the quiet joy of a life lived on one's own terms. They laughed at shared observations, like the absurdity of expensive yachts being destroyed, or the irony of life's unpredictability, walking along the Miami waterfront afterward. They found themselves immersed in an unexpected intimacy. James pointed out favorite fishing spots, small parks where locals gathered, and quiet streets lined with palm trees. Clara listened, enchanted by his stories, noticing how different his world was, yet how inviting it felt. He was grounded, authentic, and unpretentious, the opposite of the people she usually encountered. For James, the experience was equally transformative. Clara was more than her status or her family fortune. She was curious, adventurous, and unafraid to see the world through someone else's eyes. He realized he could laugh freely with her, share stories he'd never told anyone, and feel understood in a way he hadn't before. Despite the differences in their social worlds, a connection had begun to form, one built on genuine respect, shared experiences, and something neither could fully name yet. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting orange and pink hues across the sky, they paused on a pier overlooking the water. Clara turned to James, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. "I didn't expect this," she admitted softly. "I didn't expect to feel this." James shook his head with a small smile. Feeling a similar pull he couldn't ignore. "Neither did I," he said. In that moment, two very different worlds had begun to intertwine. What started as a rescue had evolved into the beginning of something deeper, something thrilling, uncertain, and undeniably real. And both of them felt in their hearts that their lives would never be the same again. Weeks passed, and James and Clara continued to see each other, their worlds colliding in ways that were both thrilling and challenging. For James, the experience was surreal. He had never been inside a mansion, never attended a gala, and certainly never imagined sharing laughter and quiet moments with a woman of such wealth and influence. Yet with Clara, none of that mattered. She didn't treat him like an outsider. She treated him like an equal, that simple. Genuine acceptance made his heart swell in ways he had never expected. Clara, too, was discovering a new side of life. James's world was simple, but it was rich in experiences, friendships, and authenticity. He showed her his favorite fishing docks, the little coffee shop where locals gathered, and his small, humble apartment filled with plants and tools. She loved seeing the pride in his eyes when he fixed a boat or shared stories of his childhood near the marina. For the first time in years, Clara felt a life free from expectations, where she could just be herself. One evening, James invited her to a quiet beach just outside the city. The sun had already begun to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. They walked barefoot along the sand, the gentle waves brushing against their feet. Clara laughed as James tried, unsuccessfully, to balance on a driftwood log. "You're hopeless at this?" she teased, nudging him with her shoulder. "Maybe," he admitted with a grin, "but I'm trying my best." The conversation eventually turned deeper. Clara spoke about the pressures of her family, the expectations that came with her wealth, and the loneliness she often felt despite being surrounded by people. James listened silently, holding her hand when the words grew heavy, offering nothing but his presence and attention. He spoke, too, about the simplicity and struggles of his life, the satisfaction of earning an honest day's work, and the joy of small victories. Their honesty created a bridge between their worlds, a bond neither of them could ignore. As twilight fell, they sat on the edge of a wooden pier, legs dangling over the water. James looked at Clara, her eyes shimmering with reflected moonlight. "You've changed my life," he said quietly. Clara turned toward him, her heart racing. "And you've changed mine," she whispered, a single tear slipping down her cheek. For a moment neither spoke, only holding on to the truth of that connection. The city lights began to twinkle in the distance, but in that moment, all that existed was them. Wealth, status, and expectations faded away, leaving only two people who had found something rare and extraordinary, a love born from courage, honesty, and unexpected connection. As they rose to leave, Clara rested her head on James's shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, holding her close, knowing that the journey ahead would have challenges, but feeling confident that together they could navigate any obstacle. In the end, it wasn't the yacht, the fire, or the chance meeting that mattered. It was the bond that had formed, strong and unshakable, between two hearts from completely different worlds. And as they walked back toward the city lights, both knew their lives had been forever changed.